Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Trusted Advisor and Get Real Project Trust webinar series. Today's webinar is called Getting Your Advice Heard and Taken, the Hidden Driver of Influence in Business. It's going to be hosted by Charles H. Green, who's the CEO of Trusted Advisor Associates. We're going to get started in just 1 second. Thanks for joining. If you guys have questions, please use the chat feature. It's on the bottom of your screen. Feel free to message with questions, comments. Everybody can see this. If you reply all, or you can send a direct message to myself. I'll be filtering questions for Charlie throughout the webinar. If you send any messages to Charlie, he's probably not going to have a chance to look at it, so you can send them to everybody or to me. And Charlie, you want to take it away now, or do you want to wait 1 more minute?
Let's give it about half a minute.
Okay. I'm going to welcome everybody that just joined, because we have a lot of people that joined in the last 30 seconds. Welcome to the Trusted Advisor Get Real Project TrustMatters webinar series, Getting Your Advice Heard and Taken, the Hidden Driver of Influence in Business. Charles H. Green is hosting today. He's the CEO of Trusted Advisor Associates and author of the Trusted Advisor book. If you guys have questions, on the bottom of your navigation, there's a chat feature. Feel free to ask the questions that you can reply to everybody, to the group or myself, Jason Gluskin, and don't message Charlie directly, because he's going to be looking at the presentation. But we'll answer questions throughout the webinar. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's kick it off here. I'm going to see if I can get my picture up here for a second. Hi to everybody. Thank you for joining today. This is one of my most favorite topics in the whole arena of trust. I just want to shout out to a few people here that I see coming. We got some old friends here from EY, from Ramble. Thanks to Deborah Moran for bringing along a lot of people from apps today. I see some old names from Navy Federal, from the Clearing, State Farm, Workday, Blue Line. Anyway, let's get started here. Let me get back to this. As I said, this is one of my favorite topics in the whole area of trust. And just the context, that this is the third in a series of 5 webinars that I'm doing with my colleague Andrea Howe. Andrea is my co-author on the Trusted Advisor Fieldbook, partner with me at Trusted Advisor Associates, and head of her own firm, the Get Real Project. The first session I did a while ago, a few months, called Understanding the Trust Equation. Andrea did Recovering Lost Trust. Today, we're going to talk about a critical issue. How do you get your advice taken? How do you get people to, do what you think is the right thing to do? Andrea is going to cover a different kind of sales call in a few months, and I will talk about trust-based organization after that. You can get sign-up details at the end of the webinar, or you can message Jason. You'll figure it out. Very quickly, the advertising part here. I am author or co-author of 3 books, The Trusted Advisor, Trust-Based Selling, and the Trusted Advisor Field Book. We've been in business for almost 20 years now, helping largely professional services firms, but basically anybody who is in advisory capacity. End of advertisement. There we go. So how do you get your advice taken? How do you have influence over people? How do you persuade them to take the advice that we're just going to assume that your advice is right, that it's good advice? How do you do that? Well, let me point out, it's a daunting task. It really is. It's not easy. If any of you out there are old enough to have teenagers, you know viscerally what I mean. How do you get a teenager to do what you say? And if you don't have teenagers, just think back a few years to when you were one. And let me suggest all of us are still teenagers. None of us like to do what other people tell us to do. So there's an art to getting people to do what you like. And by the way, let's be clear, the influence, persuasion, those are somewhat, neutral words, but they can easily bleed into other terms, other phrases that are kind of synonymous. How do we sway people? How do we seduce them? How do we talk somebody into something? These begin to get a little negative, right? How do you manipulate people? How do you hustle people into doing things? That's the dark side of influence and persuasion. And I want to be clear, everybody, we all kind of have this suspicion. We have an image of a used car dealer. They're trying to con you into doing something, and we're all very suspicious. Most people are a little trusting and a little suspicious at the outset. So how do we influence people without falling into these darker kinds of categories? Now, this is relevant in various forms of influence. Most of the people on this video call today, I think, are in some form or another in the business of advising people what to do, some kind of expert advising. This is absolutely, sales is one subcategory of this. I view sales as simply a subcategory of influence and persuasion, a particular category, which is interesting in its own right, but it's really a subcategory within influence. Negotiation falls into the same category, and we're going to borrow some examples from there. Debate is another one. If you find yourself in a debate with somebody, how do you, quote, win the debate, or is that even the right way to think about it? Interrogation, interestingly enough, is going to have some application here, even though I assume hardly any of you are in the business of interrogation, but it has a few things to teach us. Here's a good guideline. If you think about winning the argument, you're dead. This is really about getting to agreement. Now, let me back off there and let's step way back and think for a minute about how it is that we think. Because I would argue that most of us in business, in the Western world, who've come up through Western education, whether it's liberal arts or MBA programs or engineering or whatever, we have a particular view that we bought into about the nature of how we think. And it's essentially linear, that we think that people deduce data or deduce conclusions from data. I have this discussion occasionally with lawyers, and it's interesting. Lawyers are particularly bought into the paradigm that people, think logically and rationally, and we collect data and we deduce conclusions from it. So I remember years ago I did a session with lawyers, and I started out by asking them, "Do you think ordinary people think rationally?" And they said, "Sure." And I said, "Well, what's the difference between you and them?" And their answer was, "We're just better at it than that. We are better rational people than the average person." Well, push on that. I asked the lawyers, "Are juries rational?" And they laugh and they kind of say, "Well, no, actually, not juries. Juries are crazy. Despite that TV show that's out there about how you can manipulate people, rationally figure out their desires and so forth, they would argue juries are pretty emotional." And they would buy that. So maybe that's an exception, they think. Well, and I say, well, what about judges? Are they rational? Does it make a difference what judge you get assigned to? Does it make a difference what side of the bed they got up on that morning? And even lawyers will tell you, yeah, okay, I agree. Even judges tend to be sort of non-rational. My point is simply, where we live in a world where the rules of the game in business are, if you want to persuade somebody, you present them a logical argument, a data-based, linear, structured, empirically driven, logically tight argument. And somehow if we do that, we will persuade them. They will become convinced. Well, one of the big messages of today is that's just not true. It doesn't mean rational argument is irrelevant. Doesn't mean you can ignore it. It does have a role, and we'll talk about that. But if you think that's how you're going to persuade people, think again. That's what I want to share with you, what really, really happens here. For those of you, some of you have heard of this, Robert Cialdini wrote a really good book, I think almost 20 years ago, called Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. Well, Cialdini lists about 7 different factors that determine whether or not we are influenced by other people, whether we're inclined to take their advice. I won't go through all of them. Some of them you've heard, like, act now, supply limited. Believe it or not, that one works. There's a reason you hear it on TV a lot. Another one is new and improved. That really works as a hook for us. But the number one factor that he lists, the first one he lists in the book, I found is absolutely relevant for trust-based persuasion. And it's really simple and a little surprising. When I first read it, I was surprised. His number one factor of influence is reciprocity. Now, if you're like me, the first time you saw that, you're thinking, what has that got to do with influence persuasion? Well, let me suggest to you, if I were there in the room with you, I would come up to one of you right now. I'd walk over, I'd put a big smile on my face, I would reach out my hand and lean in toward you in a commonly known gesture we call a handshake. And what would you do if I did that to you? Let me tell you, 100 to 1, 1,000 to 1, what you would do is to reciprocate. It's hardwired into us as human beings that when somebody extends a gesture like that, It's almost beyond your control. You are going to shake hands back. You'll mumble some stupid inanity in return to whatever I said, but you'll shake the hand. That's an example of reciprocity. And when you think about it, that's a trivial little example, but you can make book on that. 1,000 to 1, you could bet that the other person is going to reach out and shake hands. If they don't, it's a pivotal event. If they turn, they don't have to. They could turn their back on you and spurn you, and it would be a radical kind of a thing. That's a small example of reciprocity. Now, I'm not going to suggest to you that handshakes are the key to getting your advice taken. That's simply a simple metaphor. And what I want to do throughout most of this presentation is give you a bunch of metaphors and some examples and a little bit of thinking, but mostly some examples to how we see this play out in business, not with handshakes, but with something else. So let me give you first a little vignette, little story. Let's imagine that I've been on the road, which I do occasionally, giving a similar talk to this in front of audiences. And assume with me that I've been having a real pain in my left shoulder for the last 5 days on the road. And it's really starting to hurt me. So I'm thinking I got to go see my doctor when I get back home to New Jersey. And meanwhile, I'm a good patient. I'm collecting data, right? I'm trying to make notes of what's going on so that when I talk to my doctor, I can communicate it. Well, scenario A, okay? I go see my doctor in New Jersey and I say, doctor, pain in my left shoulder, really hurting me. Here's what's been happening. Number 1, it happens after I eat fried chicken. Number 2, it happens only between the 5th and the 10th floors of a building. What's going on? Help me out here. And the doctor says to me, yeah, listen, that kind of thing, it's no big deal. Just take some ibuprofen, all right? You'll be fine. See you next month at our regular checkup. Bye. Now, how would you feel if you were in my shoes, if you got that kind of reaction from your doctor? I'm not there to ask you personally, but let me suggest most of you would say, kind of dismissed, kind of unheard, unappreciated, dissed, Now, some of you might say, who cares how you feel, Charlie? The only question is compliance. Do you or do you not take the ibuprofen that he recommended? Well, I think most of us probably would, although a little bit resentfully. I'm sure some of you out there would probably say, I'll show you, I'm not going to take any ibuprofen, I'll just hurt. Right? But anyway, let's call that scenario A. All right. Now, scenario B, same data background. I go to my doctor. I got all the data. I say, doctor, here's my situation. Left shoulder really hurting me. Number 1, it happens after I eat fried chicken. Number 2, and the doctor says, wait. Back up a second. Does that happen after you eat fried fish? And I think, actually, no, it doesn't. Funny. Why? How did you know that? And the doctor says, yeah, I thought so. Let me ask something else. Does it happen if you're in an elevator in a building and you're going up and down in the elevator? Does the pain come and go with the altitude? And I think, yes, that's incredible. How did you know that? What's going on? And the doctor says, well, listen, first of all, you can get 100% symptomatic relief with just some ibuprofen. You really don't have to worry too much about this thing. What's going on is a weird little interaction between local cooking oils used with fast foods and barometric pressures in certain climates. It's complicated. You don't need to worry about it, okay? Just get some ibuprofen. Now how do I feel? Let me suggest to you, I feel great, because not only do I have a great doctor, he probably couldn't have done it without my help, of course, but you might say, what's the only relevant question is, do I or do I not buy the ibuprofen? Well, absolutely. In this case, you buy the ibuprofen. Not only that, you probably say, how much should I buy? Where would you like me to get it? Is there a brand name you suggest I do? Would you like me to pick some up for you? Would you like me to recommend this to anybody else? We're all over it. So what's the difference between those two scenarios? Let me suggest it's this. If you listen to me, I will listen to you. If you do not listen to me, I will not listen to you. Now, that's reciprocity, right? Triggered by listening. And again, that's just a very simple little metaphor parallel there. But let me give you some other examples that are going to feel a little bit more real world. Some of you out there who are more in the field of sales have probably read Neil Rackham. He's kind of the god of sales literature research. He's done tons of research on sales behavior. I was lucky enough to spend a day with him at his writer's cabin, he calls it, in the Shenandoah Mountains a few years ago. Some cabin, by the way, like 3,000 square feet overlooking this gorgeous gorge. If that's his writer's cabin, I can't imagine what his main house looks like. Anyway, he's done very well. And I said, Neil, is there any one problem? You're the man in sales. Is there any one issue that cuts across all sales to the point that you would say, this is the #1 problem in sales. And Neil said, yeah, there is. It's premature solutions, thinking that the sooner you can solve the problem, the more effective you're going to be. The opposite is true. If you're in a rush to solve the problem, that's going to decrease the likelihood that you get the sale. Now, what is that except a variation on the same theme? If you listen to me first, I will then be inclined to listen to you. But if you're not going to listen to me, if you're in a rush to get the answer, and let's face it, a lot of us do that. That's what we think our job is, get in a hurry to the answer. That's going to have the opposite effect of what we think. If you listen to me, I'll listen to you. If you don't listen to me, I'm not going to listen to you. Let me go far afield, suicide hotlines, because this has to do all the stuff with various forms of human behavior, this basic rule, right? There are two kinds of people that volunteer on suicide hotlines. First, there are a few people whose lives have personally been touched by that kind of tragedy and who are deeply committed to preventing that sort of agony, for other people. They're probably in the minority. The more common volunteers are probably like a lot of you on this call here today, people who have been reasonably successful in life and who want to give back, who want to make a difference, who want to have an impact, who want to move the needle. And those people, unless trained, it turns out, are a disaster. And here's what has to happen in training. It turns out that the average suicide hotline call lasts about 20 minutes, but only if you spend the first 10 minutes listening. Now, these well-intended volunteers who really want to have an impact, their motivations are not a problem. It's all good. But if they're not trained about that 10-minute first listen thing, here's what happens. Some guy standing on the Brooklyn Bridge, he calls up the hotline. He says, it's all over. My girlfriend has left me. I'm ending it now. And what do these untrained, well-intended people do? They say, wait, don't be in a rush. There's plenty of apps out there. We got swipe apps now. There's Match.com, plenty of fish in the sea, not to worry. Well, guess what? That is absolutely the wrong thing to say. When you're in a moment of huge emotional stress like that, the last thing you want to hear is some idiot giving you free dating advice. It's the opposite of what works. It's an extreme case of, if you listen to me first, I will listen to you. If you don't listen to me, this conversation is over, very tragically in this case. I gave that example, by the way, several years ago to somebody in a room, and he raised his hand back in the room, and he said, Charlie, you're understating the case. And I said, understating? I really kind of thought I was trying to be strong on that one. He said, I volunteered on one of those things, and one day I got a call, and for 20 minutes, all the other person did was breathe on the other end of the line. And my job was to breathe back. Exactly. If you listen to me, I will listen to you. Listening includes listening to somebody breathing. And if you do that, they will eventually listen to you, because that's the same reaction as the handshake. It's hardwired into us as human beings to reciprocate. By the way, good for good and bad for bad. If somebody treats you badly, suspiciously, insultingly, hatefully, guess what? You're going to react pretty much the same way. So this works for good and for bad. Let me continue giving you some examples here. In the field of negotiation, Michael Wheeler, Harvard Business School prof, who's written on this, brilliant book, by the way, strongly recommended, How to Improvise Agreement in a Chaotic World. Here's some of the points he makes. We want others to be concerned about us, yet we prefer other people to see us as competent. But people tend to see warmth and competence as inversely related. So if we view the person we deal with as competent, then we assume they're going to feel less warm to us. The lesson, the more successful we are in improving our competence, the more distance from others we create. So the price of appearing super competent is they don't warm up to you very much. Again, there's this interplay between we think that our job in persuading people is to be super competent, credible, all that, powerful, logical arguments. And there's a problem with that, and Wheeler is pointing it out in the field of negotiation. Tom Friedman, New York Times columnist, author of The World is Flat and a number of other books. Here's some things that Tom Friedman had to say about this whole subject a few years ago at a commencement address from Williams College, I think it was. People often ask me how I, an American Jew, have been able to operate in the Arab Muslim world for 20 years, and my answer is always the same. The secret is to be a good listener. The most important sign, a part of listening, is that it is a sign of respect. It's not what you hear by listening. It's not about the data. It's not about the answers to your questions. It's not about proving or disproving your pet hypothesis. It's what you say by listening that is important. It is an act of respect, just like the handshake. The handshake is symbolic. I think originally the origin was, see, I have no weapons in my hand, something along those lines. It is a sign of respect, just like all kinds of rituals that we have for, basic signs of civility and so forth. So if you are focused 100% on listening without attachment to outcome, but simply as a sign of respect, that triggers the reciprocal response in the other party. Now, take this seriously. Tom Friedman is a Jewish guy from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he hangs out on the Gaza Strip, and people talk to him, which is extraordinary. And this is him explaining exactly why that works. And it's exactly the same principle we've been talking about. If you listen to me deeply, without attachment, without an end, without watching your watch, or without trying to prove anything, or even judging, what the data is, they will return the favor, because that's what we as human beings do. A recent article in The Guardian about a family or a husband-wife team exploring terrorist interrogations. This is interesting. They took hundreds of hours of videotape of interrogations of really bad people. I mean, they don't get any better, right? And they analyzed them over 100 variables. And we all have this image of the successful interrogation is, the bright white light and borderline, what am I blanking on the word? Doing bad things to people, torture. And somehow that's what's effective. Well, here's the result of some of their research, a few of their findings. Emily and Lawrence Allison. Rapport turns out to be the closest thing that interrogators have to a truth serum. The moment an interrogation turns into an argument, it fails. The more someone tries to persuade us, the more we dwell on why not. And again, we're back to the teenager dynamic, right? If you try and get me to do what you want me to do, I'm going to do exactly the opposite. What's their advice? I love this poetic version. In a tug of war, the harder you pull, the harder they pull. My advice, let go the rope. Get out of that game. Stop playing the game of trying to persuade people. So there's a real irony here. What this is suggesting is that one of the best ways to try and get people to adopt your point of view is stop trying to get them to adopt your point of view. There's a real paradox in here. How about in the field of marriage? John Gottman out on the West Coast has written a book, and he's in his 70s or 80s now. He's seen thousands, tens of thousands of couples. And here's a finding that I think many of us maybe have heard before. You have to let your partner know you fully understand and empathize before you suggest a solution. How many of you out there in a romantic relationship at some point in your life have ever heard the other person say to you, would you stop trying to solve the problem? I just want you to listen to me. Anybody ever hear that one? Nah. It's exactly what we're talking about. If you want me to listen to you, first you listen to me. If you listen to me, I will listen to you. If you don't listen to me, I will not listen to you. Now, I don't know about you, but I grew up in the field of management consulting. And in the field of management consulting, I was taught one thing. Nobody ever said it quite like this, but I think it was pretty clearly the message, was that if you had the right answer and you were devoted to your client's good and you were working on this problem and you found out the answer and you were right and you gave them the answer and they didn't do it, then what you had here, and it's amazing how often that happened, what you had here was a case of SCS, or stupid client syndrome. And it's amazing how often SCS popped up, I gotta tell you. And the answer for SCS was very simple. It was raise the font on the PowerPoint, right? And hit them with a few more spreadsheets showing the data, ineluctably leading to the deductive conclusion that you were suggesting to them and therefore proving that they were wrong. Now, it never seemed to work out quite the way it was supposed to when I tried that. I don't know if any of you had a similar experience, but in case you did, we're going to raise the font on the PowerPoint in a minute, but sorry, I got to slide out of sequence here. Let me suggest to you that the number one cause of us getting into this problem, the biggest single cause of us not listening, not doing the obvious stuff that I pointed out to you, get ready, here it is It is accelerating way too rapidly to the answer. Everybody on this call, I'm assuming, is, as I said, in some form of consultative, advisory kind of a role. And we view our jobs, me too, as how do we get the stuff that we know, the things that we're expert in, how do we translate that expertise to people? We think our job is to convince people. And that's the problem. We think our job is to figure out the problem and the answer as soon as possible. And, you know, we've all been raised since second grade. Me, teacher, I got the answer first. And the teacher calls on you and says, good for you, Johnny. Good for you, Charlie. You got the right answer first. You get the blue ribbon. You get the gold star. Well, unfortunately, in the real world, people don't react positively to that. In fact, if you're sitting on the receiving end of somebody who is in a race with themselves to get to the answer quick, what does it feel like? It feels like I'm not relevant, you know? You're having this battle with yourself. You're in a race with yourself to see how quickly you can get rid of me, how quickly you can put me into a box of what's wrong and categorize me with other people. You don't really care about me at all. You're just in a hurry to get rid of me and on to the next problem. That's what it feels like. So paradoxically, there's a lot of paradoxes here. This desire to get rapidly to the answer is exactly the wrong thing. It gets in the way of us listening first so that we can depend on the natural human reaction of listening back. Well, as I said, the consulting lesson that I learned was raise the font on the PowerPoint. So in case you went to the same school that I did, let's raise the font here. And let me suggest to you what I think are some of the takeaways from this little talk here. Influence and effectiveness is heavily non-rational. In fact, of all the 7 factors that Cialdini lists in his book, not one of them is rational argument. So again, here's a guy writing how do you influence people. None of the factors he lists are rational argument. Now, there's a similar book written by, why do I always forget his name? Well-respected academic at Harvard Ed School, a psychologist. He's written a book called Influencing Minds. His name will come to me. And he lists 8 reasons or 8 factors that determine influence. One of them is rational argument, but it's far from number 1. So whether you like your academics from University of Arizona, like Cialdini, or from Harvard, like name we'll remember, the answer seems to be it's just not rational argument. It's overrated. Now, I should stop here and say rational argument does have a role to play. I'm not trying to say forget it. I'm not trying to say content expertise doesn't matter. Here's the role that it plays. It gets you in the door. That's critical. Think about your resume. You put your biggest accomplishments at the front. Your website does this. Potential clients, potential employers look and say, wow, they're really smart. They've done all this stuff. Let's talk to them. So it's critical. Showing that you're an expert gets you in the door to have a conversation in the first place. It's also critical, incidentally, after you have made the sale, the influence, the advice is accepted, when people explain to other people why they did what you suggested. Because think about it this way. Nobody is going to say, yeah, we bought that job from EY because we like them. They're, just really nice people. Not going to happen, okay? That's not what people are going to say. What they're going to say is, we bought it, we bought that solution from Ramble because they're really good, man. They've got tons of experience. They've seen this before. Really persuasive approach. Love their methodology. That's why we did it. Well, that's what we're supposed to say. It's a social convention. The truth is, in the meetings that you have with them, the conversations that actually lead them to adopt your advice, it's not that's happening. It's all the other stuff we've just finished talking about. It's whether you show genuine interest, respect, by paying attention, by seeking to understand them for no other end other than understanding who they are and where they're coming from, and their natural response to then pay attention to you. Now, can you be successful and be stupid? No. Can you be successful and be incompetent or inconsistent? No, those are important things, but they're jacks for openers, they're table stakes. This is what pushes us over the top in terms of influence and persuasion. It's not very rational. It works through this basic principle of reciprocity, hardwired into us as human beings through eons of civilization. AI is not going to replace this one. We're still going to want to know, what was the algorithm that drove that decision? How does this work? And reciprocity happens in conversations. It doesn't happen in value propositions. It doesn't happen in algorithms. It doesn't happen on your website or your clever tagline. It happens in interactions, maybe in email, yeah, maybe in phone conversations for sure, but definitely in face-to-face. And here, the ultimate irony, I think, is that it's not your talking that drives people to take your advice, it's your listening. It's your listening, not their listening. So this is rife with paradox. The way to get yourself heard is to shut up. The way to get other people to listen to you is not to, get them to listen to you. It's for you listening to them. And the ultimate paradox out of all this stuff, I know I'm going to sound like a Buddhist or a Beatles song or something, but it's true. The ultimate paradox is the way to get people to take your advice is stop trying to get them to take your advice. Detach from the outcome. When you walk into a sales conversation, do not have in mind, how am I going to get the sale? How am I going to get them to buy this advice? It's rather to say, you know what? I'm here to have a conversation and to try and help these people. And stop that noise in your head that says, oh, I'm going to get the check in the sales box. My boss is going to love me. Just let things happen. Be there, detach from the outcome for the greater sake of the person in front of you. And by the way, if you don't get the sale, it may well be because you shouldn't have. The last thing you want is a sale that you get under false pretenses. I've had that happen a couple of times, and it's terrible. So let me stop there, and let's make sure we have time to do some interactive questions or sales. And Jason, I hope you've been tracking here. Just to review, this has been the third in the series of 5 webinars that my colleague Andrea Howe and I are giving on how trust matters, understanding the trust equation and recovering lost trust. Both of those are available for re-recording. I mean, they've been recorded. You can go back and review them. Today we talked about getting your advice taken. We're going to talk in future. Andrea will talk about a different kind of sales call, and I'll talk about a trust-based organization. So let me just go back and leave it on this last slide. And
so Charlie, I think you've done a great job of presenting, because so far we don't have any questions. So if anybody, we have a lot of people on the line. If anybody does have any questions, feel free to message them in. Otherwise, Charlie might cover off on a few more examples if we have the time.
Well, I think we can open it up to audio too, can't we, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, people can unmute their microphones if they'd like to. So feel free. If somebody has a question, I'm going to put myself on mute. But
yeah, not all at once, people.
The other option is if anybody has any examples of specific situations that relate to the the concepts of listening and trying to get your advice heard, feel free to ask any specific examples. So we just got one question. How can you guide the conversation while still listening at the same time?
That's a great question. I mean, that really is a great question, because it's how do you have 2 conversations at once in your head? If you're thinking about what they're saying, how do you keep track of that and at the same time keep asking questions? Great question, and here's the answer. Don't try and do them both at once. Don't fake it. There's a reason that, texting and driving are a bad idea, because they both require, parallel processing at about the same level of cognitive effort. And we're not built to do that. We're not built to multitask above certain cognitive levels of activity. And this is one of those examples. So here's what you do. When you're listening, forget about thinking. Just listen 100%. Don't worry too much about taking notes. If you have to at some point, say, wait, hang on a second. I really need to get that written down. Okay, can you hold on just a second? And then write it down and then come back and say, good, now tell me more. And when you're done listening and not thinking about it, then you stop and you say, wow, let me just think out loud with you, okay? Let me process this with you so I make sure I'm getting it. If I follow what you're saying, then that would mean, this is connected to that. And what was the cause of this thing again? In other words, you make the thinking a dialogue, not a hidden monologue in your own head. So, I mean, that is a great question, because we're all tempted, we're afraid of letting people into our thought process. Somehow we're supposed to have thought all this in advance and then present it. And I'm telling you, don't do that.
So Charlie, we do have a bunch more that are coming in now. I think people are feeling comfortable. So the next question is, do folks need to know our position before we actually let go of trying to make the point?
Do folks need to know our position before we let go?
So basically, I guess if you have an opinion that's contrary, to what you're hearing, do you need to get that out there, or should maybe you just let it go and not even bring it
Well, I
up?
think at some point you have to get it out there because they're engaging with you, presumably because you're an expert and they do want to hear from you. I think in general, what you want to do is hear them out a fair amount first, and then there comes a point, and this is where it comes into art, not science. There comes a point in the conversation where you perhaps need to say something like, I got to tell you, that tends not to be the way that we see it. We tend to see this over here, but keep talking to me. I want to understand why you have this view and we have that view. Let's get to the bottom of this together. Why do we seem to see this differently? So you phrase it, first of all, you wait a while, and then you phrase it in the form of a collaborative exploration of why we seem to have different viewpoints. Gee, why is that? Be curious about it.
So the next question is, how do you establish credibility while listening?
Don't worry about it so much. Seriously, credibility, your credibility did most of its work by getting you in the door. They've already made that decision. You're credible enough to be talking with you. So part of it is don't worry as much. Do not try and worry about showing off how smart you are in the course of the conversation. The fact is, you will show it merely in ways of saying things like, oh, yeah, right. Or the way, you can look dumb, deer in the headlights, in which case they will know you don't know anything. Or you can nod sagely if you do in fact know it, and they'll believe it. And there will come moments when you say, oh, that's how Oracle does it. Yeah. Or that's like this over here.
Actually, the next question ties right into that. Can you talk about the power of curious questions in the listening process?
Yeah, if it's really coming from a place of curiosity, it's the best thing in the world. If you're genuinely focused on, I really don't know the answer to this. Help me understand. That comes through as completely focused on them. If you're truly curious, you can't be self-oriented and self-preoccupied, because curiosity comes from a great place. So, you probably don't come up with curious questions ahead of time and pull them sneakily off your crib sheet. Curious questions come, out of the context of the conversation in real time, and they become seen as curious by you saying, wow, I'm really curious. How does that fit with this? So let it evolve naturally, and it's a great place to be coming from.
So the next question is, somebody also wants to hear the answer to this. How do you listen when customers use RFPs to purchase services?
Yep. Well, I probably share the same bias everybody on this call does. We kind of dislike RFPs intensely. In fact, I'll go as far as to say the extent to which a client relies on RFPs is the extent to which that client is afraid of engaging. And there are a couple things you could do. You can suggest politely that whoever's sending out the RFP would really be better served if they invited all the bidders to have a conversation with them, whether it's a half-hour phone call or an hour presentation. This is free consulting, for heaven's sakes. They really should engage in conversation. That may persuade a company or two. Most of them it won't. The other thing you can do is you can talk to the person in charge of, the procurement head, whoever you're dealing with, and the RFP, and say, listen, I get it. The world is moving towards procurement and RFPs and so forth. I do not want to mess with your process. I'm not going to go around with you, to our favorite old client. I want to respect your process. What can I do to make your job easier? Because the truth is, if you try and subvert it and go back to your old buddy who kicked it down to procurement in the first place and wrote the RFP, that's not going to help you. In many cases, procurement is the new client. So treat them that way with respect and offer to, be helpful as much as you can.
So there's, a little bit of a nuanced question, but somebody said that they have problems focusing and their mind wanders. Do you have any advice for how to focus when listening?
I don't have unique advice in that. I think, all the stuff that we read about mindfulness and meditation, there's some truth to it. Clear your head before you go in the room. Take 30 seconds, do a breathing exercise, and focus. Look them in the eye while you're talking. And if you lose focus, don't be afraid of saying, "I'm sorry, I was out listening for a second. Would you mind? I apologize. Could you go back and repeat that?" Because at least it shows A, you're transparent, you're willing to call yourself out on it, and B, you really are interested. and you had
Right.
a mental lapse for a second.
Well, some stuff that I learned from you is if you're preoccupied on the result, then you're going to get caught up in your own personal dialogue or your own insecurities that you feel like you have to interject or
Right.
say something, right? So I think that those are two other good points. So here's a great question. Somebody said people seem to be either more right-brained or left-brained. Is there a difference of approach on listening and dealing with those types of people?
Uh, I don't know. I don't have standing to answer that question. Just as a person who's been doing this for a while and has some gray hair, I'm inclined to say no, there's not much difference. This stuff that I'm talking about has to do with respect. And I don't think right brain, left brain has much to do with a sense of whether people are paying attention to us and whether they respect us or not. I welcome, comments from any psychologist in the group, but my instinct is that one cuts across right brain, left brain. This is about respect, etiquette, that kind of thing.
Well, that's the last of the questions. We do have a few more minutes if anybody wants to ask anything else. Otherwise, we could end a few minutes early. Everybody, we will be sending out a recording of the webinar to everybody who registered. Feel free to forward on to your colleagues. I posted the link. There's one more question that just came on.
Yep.
When do you decide to when do you decide to hold them or decide to fold them?
Well, the best way to do that is to do it jointly, like everything, and to say to that client or whomever, say, listen, I don't think this is going so well. I don't think we're getting what you need. I'm not sure this is going to work out for us. I don't want to cut this off prematurely, but it sounds like this is not working. Do you agree? Does that make sense? And to have it end that way. In other words, make them a complicit partner in the decision to break up, if you will. I think that's probably the best way to do it.
Yeah.
And by the way, I guess let me say one thing else. The more common mistake is to break up too quickly, or to keep haranguing them. If you've got a CRM system and you're tracking leads, and somebody hasn't responded to you, and you're on your third or fourth email to them saying, "Hey, we haven't heard from you. Anything still going on? Anything I can do to help?" Give it up.
Right.
Stop hitting them with emails.
That's actually somebody just asked a question related to that said, if the only medium to ask a question is in writing, email or something like that, how do you encourage people to be more open other than asking open-ended questions? So,
well, even in email, you can raise the issue. You can have a meta conversation. You can say, listen, I've sent you a couple of emails, and maybe something's going on there. I don't want to harass you. In my experience, seriously, 2/3 of the things in anybody's sales funnel, they go off course. And maybe they'll come back next year, maybe they won't, but you might as well admit it and be honest with people. I don't want to harangue you. If there's something has changed, I get it, no problem. Should I stop sending you emails? It's amazing how much more response you get from that kind of email than from, gee, I'm just checking, still haven't heard from you from last April.
Somebody asked a question, I'm trying to get a little more specificity. What do you, when someone is being intentionally provocative, I'm asking them what they specifically mean by provocative, how much do you accommodate them, basically?
I like you, Jason, I'd have to know what they meant by provocative.
Okay, well, Lance, if you have a chance to reply to that, we can answer that. But otherwise, all the webinars are going to, they're hosted on our website if you want to see the past ones. We've had a bunch of requests to see the past webinars. I sent out the link. I'm sorry, if someone's trying to provoke reactions, I guess. Let's see. I'm not sure. Let's see.
Well, let me make an assumption about what that person's trying to say. If somebody's picking at you and being trying to get a rise out of you, being nasty, being inappropriate, don't take it personally. Imagine if that were a 3-year-old kid, if it were your 3-year-old and they're behaving badly, you would tell them, don't behave badly. You don't take it personally. Don't get wrapped up in it. Just say, here's my answer to your question. Stay calm. You might even say, gee, you seem a little upset by this. Was it something I said? Stay calm, stay cool, respond to the questions in their substance. And there's generally not much percentage in getting mad at people. Particularly if their motivations were bad. It just feeds it. Stay above it.
So there's one last question we can get, then we'll finish it up. It's actually a great one. Somebody said, once you're done listening and carefully reviewed what you've heard, what are your next steps for presenting your advice?
Again, I think you're hearing a common tone here. First of all, you're done when you say, is there anything else that I want to make sure I get everything here that's relevant to what we're talking about? When they say, no, that's it. What's your advice? That's when you give them your advice. We all tend to do that too soon. And I think when you're at that point, you can say, well, given everything I've heard and given my experience, etc., it seems to me this is the thing that's the right way to go. This is the advice. This is what I think is right. What do you think of that? How does that react? How do you react to that? Does that make sense to you? Do you have any concerns about that? Does that comport with what you thought? Are there some issues here? Engage them. Here's my advice. What do you think? What does that make you feel? So you immediately, be clear and simple and direct about what the advice is, and ask them to continue engaging with you to explore how they feel about it, what it means, et cetera, et cetera. The advice giving is really kind of a moment in time where you just say, here's the thing, and then let's keep talking.
So to wrap it up, Charlie, you want to put on the last slide that's got your contact information, and then we'll close it off?
Did I put that last slide? Yes, I did. Thank you. I forgot. I had it there. You can give feedback and contact.
Oh yeah, sorry, we forgot to do the poll, but we're doing a quick poll for everybody that's on. Please let us know how you felt about this session, if it was valuable for you. I just launched it. Oh, sorry. There you go.
There we go. And while you're giving us a poll rating there, please, anybody here that didn't get your question asked and you want to reach out to me directly, personally. It's cgreen@trustedadvisor.com, and I will answer every single email. Promise.
And we'll be hosting 2 more webinars throughout the year. They're on the website, trustadvisor.com/webinars. We'll be sending out a follow-up email too. So thanks to everybody who attended. If you have any questions, go to trustadvisor.com.
Thanks, everybody.
Great.